You're listening to Pneuma, the crossroad of science and enlightenment. This podcast is a place where science meets soul and healing meets hope, where the latest in science meets ancient wisdom to illuminate the path toward healing and transformation. We break through stigma and misinformation to explore the transformative power of psychedelic therapy, holistic health, and the mind-body connection. Through stories, insight, and expert conversations, we provide practical solutions to help you reclaim your mental health, embrace your spirituality, and achieve true enlightenment. Hosted by Alan Wiederhold, author of the book Walking in the Garden, Discovering God Through Psychedelics. Alan is the consummate explorer, passionate about empowering others to embrace the divinity of their true selves, as well as the founder of Pneuma Health, whose mission is to restore and transform lives. Here's your host, Alan Wiederhold.
Hey everybody, it's Alan Wiederhold, founder, CEO of Pneuma, and welcome to Pneuma, the crossroad of science and enlightenment. I have a very, very special episode today. I feel like I say that on so many of these, and I always like reflect on the interactions I have with people and the conversations of healing that take place in our community. It's so fascinating to me. I was on a conversation this morning with someone down in Miami. They're doing this gigantic wellness festival, and he's just bringing this community together. We were kind of joking about this is an industry who they love each other, and we really want humanity to heal. And with that, I want to introduce a special guest today. So Justin Leake is joining me on the show today. Yes, I said Justice. Sorry, I didn't come across right. Justice Leake. We'll get into the name because I love that story all on its own. But I did some digging, and Justice, you've got a really cool background, and I want to kind of get into that. But you were in a movie when I did some research, because I always do some research on the show. You have your own Wikipedia page, so congratulations for that. Welcome to Pneuma, and again, I'm so honored that you're here.
Well, as I told you before, I'm really honored to get the opportunity to share this story. I've kind of been sitting on it for the last 5 years, living it. Now is the time, and yours is the place. So,
thank you. I'm humbled. When we connected, we talked about the story that we're going to get into. But you have created a new movement called Theropod. And this really was because of your mom, correct? You have sent me some videos. My wife and I have watched these videos, and we've already cried. I was joking with you over the last couple of days, just talking about this. But let's get into a little bit of your story first. So from what I read, you're from Georgia. You went to Auburn. Tell me about your backstory.
Good. Nothing I like talking more about than myself. Just ask my sister. I'm actually from Alabama.
Okay.
Originally, I'm an Alabama boy. Roll Tide. Here we go.
Ooh, all right.
Here we go. But my family moved to Georgia right after I got out of college, and I also moved into the Atlanta area right after college. It was where you go if you want to go to a big city. Coming from Alabama, but I actually started off school at Abilene Christian University because I was going to be a youth minister. I didn't exactly know where my path. Why are you laughing already?
Because I was going to be a youth pastor girl, I guess.
Of course. So, yeah, I mean, I love the Lord. I still do. But unfortunately, as I became a teenager, and realized I was a boy who liked boys in 90s Alabama, I was suddenly the worst of sinners. And it was the sin that you didn't talk about. My father, bless his heart, police officer, hostage negotiator, all the cool things. And he was an alcoholic, as many who are in that line of work were, because there was no PTSD back then. And what you did to cope was drink, and he did, and he wasn't a mean drunk, he was a sad one. But that didn't make it any easier for my mom, who was a third grade school teacher. She had been brought up in dirt poor, literally in a barn situation. And her father was an alcoholic, but not the sad kind, the kind they write movies about. And so her one prayer, sort of like Jenny and Forrest Gump, was, "Dear God, make me a bird so I can fly away from here, and please let me marry somebody who doesn't drink." And my dad had hid it from her for some time, and he didn't drink. He grew up in a very Christian household. They didn't drink, they didn't smoke, they didn't curse, they didn't do any of that. They loved America, and he loved America. Growing up watching World War II movies where we go off and be the hero. So he was the youngest of four boys, and when the Vietnam War started, that was his chance to serve the country that he loved and get the heck out of the cotton mill town of Valley, Alabama. And the older two brothers were drafted. The younger two volunteered. They weren't running away from, or they ran right into it. And as an 18-year-old, his first job was putting bodies in body bags, and couldn't sleep. Went to the doctor and said, help me. What can I do? And the doctor said, well, you can't die from not sleeping. You'll sleep eventually. Comes back a day or two later, still not working. He's like, well, go drink. You'll fall asleep. And he's like, sir, we don't drink in my family. And but he was desperate, so he had a drink. Still didn't work. Come back, see the doctor, and he's like, please help me. And he was like, well, did you drink? He's like, I did. He's like, well, how many did you have? He said, I had one. And he said, no, you don't just have one drink. You drink until you fall asleep. And from that was born the condition that ended up playing out in my family. And by the time I was in high school, and I realized that his cup of ice water that he kept by his recliner that smelled so funny was actually gin. And when he didn't have to hide it from me and my sister, who was older, Liberty is her name, things got pretty difficult. But to the point where I was kicking my dad out of the house, taking him to the hotel, because it was ruining my mother. My mother couldn't handle it, and he couldn't stop, and I didn't understand it. Meanwhile, I had my own struggles trying to reconcile this abomination that I was. And I can distinctly remember I was 14, 15 probably years old. And I had fasted and I had prayed and I had done everything I could to get rid of this thing. And I couldn't do it. And I wanted my life to end. And I walked out to a field back behind my house. And I just cried out to God. And I can, of course, in my mind, it's very cinematic. But I remember looking up at the trees and the wind was blowing. And it was just, I was just crying out to God. I was like, please, I can't make it go away. But I know it's wrong to kill yourself. So you can take the breath from me. So I'm going to lay down right here in this field and I'm going to slow my breath and you can take my life. And I did. I laid down in that field, and as I slowed my breath, the winds died down, and I slowed it and I slowed it. And then there was just this peace, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to live. And this was all happening in silence. I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about it, because while my church family was wonderful, so many gay people have horror stories about their church. My church was so loving. They rallied around my family. They supported my mother. They supported my father trying to get through this thing. But I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about this one. And I'd seen a movie, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. Have you seen it?
Yes.
Oh my God. Well, my family loved movies. My dad should have been an actor. So he was a renowned storyteller in the police force. He loved movies, loved celebrities and all of that. And so I grew up watching, a whole lot of movies and TV. But I had I never really saw it as like art, but when I saw that film and that first 10 minutes of the cuts, which is very common today, but it's unheard of before in this classic text and set against this sort of modern setting with music. And I was just like, I remember walking out of the theater like quiet, being like, I don't know how, but I want to do that. I want to be part of that. And I didn't know anybody who was an actor. I didn't know anybody who was in film. So but simultaneous to this, people in the church were like, you should go into the ministry. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, I love it. And I had gone on mission trips down to Guatemala and,
Oh my gosh.
Life changing. You
I
too?
Me too.
To Guatemala?
Guatemala. Yeah.
Well, there you go. I can't wait to talk to you. Are you ready? We're about to do a Joe Rogan, 3 hours.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Right?
But yeah, so the film thing was kind of in the back of my mind, but this encouragement by my church to go into Bible was, I took it. And plus, I wanted to get the heck out of Alabama. So somehow I chose Texas. I was part of the Church of Christ, and the two Church of Christ universities that I considered was Abilene Christian in Texas and Pepperdine in Malibu.
Go Waves.
How different my life would have been if that was my choice. But I chose halfway across the country instead of all the way. And while I was there, I mean, it was great. But I also then started to learn about the mechanics of how the Bible as we know it was built, and it got really tricky. And then when I was interning with a church, I saw the politics of how we're choosing what song we play, and we got to not upset this elder or that thing. And it's sort of like how never look into how a sausage is made, right? Don't look into how church is made. You kind of diminishes the luster. But right at this time, my first year at Abilene, my father went missing for a couple of weeks. Now that I was out of the house, all bets were off, and my mom was worried. So I came home, and it was expensive. We really couldn't afford it. And I got a job a little closer to home, and I was living in Atlanta and looking for an opportunity to go to school. I ended up at Auburn. While I was at Auburn, I was teaching myself film and video. I got a camera, an XLR, Final Cut Pro, and I just started making movies on my own and doing commercials, doing a lot of weddings. I still have people whose wedding I did, and they're divorced now, who are like, I still go back and watch the video because it's like a movie of my life. So I was doing that, and at Auburn, the closest they had to film was mass communication, which was teaching me nothing. I was learning more on my own. So I was like, I need to take some theater classes. If I'm going to be a director, I only knew a couple of positions, right? I should know about the acting process. Not realizing that most or many directors, especially in TV, don't care anything about the acting process. But while I was taking these acting classes, I did a scene one day, and I remember this big football player came up to me afterwards. I'd done this monologue, and he was like, man, that was so good. Like, I was like crying over there. And from that, it's my senior year. I still hadn't done any plays or anything. I had a full-time job at night. So I was going to school during the day, working till about midnight, putting myself through school. And it was a Sunday, so I didn't have work. And my classmates were auditioning for the first main stage show, which was The Crucible. And while I was waiting, there was this girl who I didn't know. She was kind of reading lines to herself. And I went up to her. I was like, do you need some help? She's like, oh, you don't mind? I was like, yeah, I do in class all the time. So when we went in to audition, it was with a new director that year. He'd just come in from Steppenwolf, which is a really big, renowned theater. And I told the stage manager, I was like, just let him know I'm not really auditioning because I have a full-time job. She's like, oh, yeah, I'll let him know. So we go in. I'm completely not nervous. I'm just helping this girl out. I'm on stage, big theater, kind of darkened. Again, dramatic. This is how I remember it. We do the scene together, and from out of the shadows, he steps forward, and he's just looking at me. He doesn't look at her, and I was like, ooh. He said, are you sure you weren't auditioning? I was like, oh, yeah, I have this full-time job, and blah, 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 blah. He's like, well, that was that was really good. Could you come back tomorrow for the callback? And I'm like kind of exploding on the inside because I'm like, whatever. But then also feeling bad that I like that this thing happened. And I said, I really can't. I have this job. And he said, well, I think you might be right for one of our leads. Do you think you could do the show if it worked out? And I was like, I'd have to ask my parents to like take me on financially. I can let you know. So I called them and I said, can I quit my job for a month or so? And they said, yeah. And I got to do the Crucible. It was exhausting because I had no technical skill and it was a lot of dialogue. I played Reverend Hale, which was a minister who was going after the truth. I got nominated for something called an Irene Ryan Award, which is collegiate performances. And thought that was maybe going to be it. But during the run of the show, the Steppenwolf director guy, he pulls me aside and he's like, have you ever thought about doing this for a living? I was like, I haven't, I just hadn't let myself believe that I could be on the other side of the camera. Right. And he said, I think you could do it. You got to work, but I think you could do it. So anyway, I was going to go back to my job, but the director of the next show was like, hey, are you auditioning for my show? And I was like, I mean, I can, I guess. Anyway, I ended up doing all the main stage shows that year and nominated for another award. And, then it was, I got hooked. One of them was a comedy, Crucible was stressful. So people liked it. But when I did a comedy and heard the laugh response for the first time, I was like, yeah, I get why people do this. I get why people do this. So then anyway, I moved to Atlanta, tried to get an agent. I was able to do that. And a few years into auditioning, Denzel Washington was coming through town to direct his second feature called The Great Debaters. And yeah, I can remember having the callback and being outside the room, and because he was so famous, they didn't tell us if he was going to be there or not, and gave us the location last minute. It was right here in Atlanta. And but I remember being in the lobby and I heard his laugh, and it's unmistakable. And I was like, oh my God, he's in the room. So sure enough, it's my turn. The door opens and it's Denzel's cousin. I mean, that's what he looked like to me. He didn't look like red carpet Denzel, because he was in like sweatpants and like a Yankees hat. And he's like, hey, Justin, come on in. And I was like, ooh, he called me Justin.
What do I do? What do I do?
Right. Now, I hated my name growing up because I was very shy. My sister's name is Liberty, liberty and justice for all. I mean, again, my dad loved this country.
I loved it. When I researched it, I was like, God, that's so cool.
It is cool. But I used to not correct people when I was a kid because I didn't want them to make a big deal about it. Again, I wasn't trying to find the spotlight. But anyway, I was like, it's justice, actually. And he looks at my headshot and he's like, oh, I see that. I was like, it's all right. I hated my name. And he was like, who are you talking to? Do you think there was a Denzel before there was this Denzel? He's like, I hated my name. And the people, growing up, they'd be like, ooh, Denzel this, right? And so we shared like a little moment. And I was auditioning for 2 different parts and I messed up on like one of them, but he's like, you got it, whatever. I left the room. I don't hear anything for like 3 months and end up getting the job. And the guy who got the other role, who I was auditioning for, is now a very famous actor. Do you know who Glenn Powell is? Right. I mean, he's like the new movie star. He was like in this latest Top Gun Maverick and a whole bunch of other stuff. But it was that film that then sent me to LA. And I was there for like a decade. With moderate success. I won't bore you with my whole story, but in 2015, 14, there were tax incentives in Atlanta that was pulling a lot of productions there. So still had an agent back in Atlanta, and I started taping. They started allowing taping. So I would tape for things back in Atlanta and started booking again. But the caveat was there's this thing called a local hire, which means they don't have to pay for you to travel. They don't have to put you up anywhere, and they get you for minimum wage. But as you're trying to build your career, you're like, okay, yes, please. So from 2014 till about 18, I was going back and forth between Atlanta and LA to do shows. And when I would be in Atlanta, I would travel down 45 minutes to where my mom was living in Noonan and stay with her. My father passed in 2009, like right after I had moved to LA. And so she was alone. My sister lived next door for most of that time, but it was 2018. Oh, I got to be careful how I talk about this. I don't want to implicate anybody.
So this is Noonan, Georgia.
Noonan, Georgia.
I
Yes.
actually have a friend who lives in Noonan, Georgia.
Hey, it's cute. You know, I'm a city guy. I like a little more going on. But I coming back and forth, I became best friends with a guy who worked in film there in Atlanta, and really the best, closest relationship I had ever had in my life. And we had so much in common. He had been a police officer. He had gone to Auburn, but is an Alabama fan, which is a big deal. Again, if you know her, anything about Alabama football politics, and really, really smart guy. And it was, I guess, yet the end of 2017, I was back working on a show, and he talked about LSD. And he had been reading a lot of books on it, and he was like, would you be down to try it? And I was like, I don't know. I'd heard so many horror stories, or like, it's going to scramble your brain, you'll never be the same. Yeah,
I always love that one too, because as you're saying LSD, I immediately think of that. This is your brain and the eggs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Right. All of that.
Yeah.
And but then there's the fear, especially as a gay man, somebody who spent my whole life
in a mask.
Yeah. Using neutral pronouns and just not sharing. And even when I moved to LA and things were starting to change, like culturally, there were more out gay actors. I asked my very famous acting teacher at the time, after my father had died, I was just realizing, like, my life is passing me by. Do I have to be afraid forever? And I asked her, I was like, do you think it's okay? And she said, well, those people who came out were already famous, Justice. And because you play certain roles, it could keep you from getting jobs. So I would not socialize within the gay community if you can help it. So once again, I was just, living behind a screen. And whenever people would take pictures, I would move out of the way and just, the whole thing. And then as social media came about and the studios wanted you to share your life, I didn't know how to share my life in an authentic way, because also the characters that I was playing were psycho killers and assholes, and I didn't know. So for me then to have this close friendship and to consider psychedelics, the fear that goes through my head is, what am I going to share? What is going to come out of my mouth that I can't take back? But I felt so safe in this relationship that I was willing to give it a try. And it was about a tab of acid in beautiful Piedmont Park here in Atlanta. And we spent the day walking around. It ended up being this giant supermoon that night that we didn't even know about. And he had this cool, like, glow staff, and he was like spinning it. And I was like in awe. But I can also remember we were up on this hill and you could see this winding walking path through the park. And I saw people rollerblading and people with babies and all that kind of stuff. And I realized, I was like, wow, they have no idea that I exist. Their world is unaware of what I'm experiencing. And that was one of the first times that I was like, this is so interesting, not to mention sort of beautiful. And my friend was talking about very emotionally about being a father and how he was afraid of imprinting on his kids negatively and wanting to be a good dad. And it was just so edifying and beautiful and spiritual. And it felt like coming home in a way that I hadn't experienced since I was a kid and had been in the church. But when there wasn't a place for me in the church, because I had gone to some, gay churches in Los Angeles and other things, but they just felt too gay. I was like, I mean, I appreciate the acceptance, but does the rainbow flag have to be behind the cross,
Right.
or draped over it? And so this experience was, it was like reconnecting to spirit. Fast forward about 8 months later to the next summer, and he invites me to a music festival. Here we go. And the music festival was amazing, something called Electric Forest. It will forever be special in my heart, but not before it offered me a PTSD-inducing 2 tabs of acid experience. So I'd had the great edifying spiritual one-on-one in nature, right? And I didn't know any of his friend group. I didn't really know this electronic music. I was just going because my friend was going, and okay, let's give it a shot. And on the second night, something like that, we're like, all right, we're doing it. They're like, we're going to see this DJ and this DJ, and here you go. I was like, all right, I got this. Well, as it started to kick in, we were watching some little skit or something. I was like, ooh, this is really feeling some kind of way. And as we were leaving that and walking to one of the stages through the forest, it was real hot, muggy, and our group stopped on this sort of walkway through the forest, and I saw a phone on the ground. I was like, oh, somebody lost their phone. So we paused in the middle of this path while we looked for somebody's phone, and I'm getting more and more uncomfortable in my body, and I'm like, oof, hot or whatever. And I can remember seeing the faces of the people passing by, and it was like my vision like zoomed in on like the corner of their face, and it was uncomfortable, or their mouth, or their, looking back, I could see that my own internal state was projecting onto the faces of the people around me. I hadn't put that together at that point, but I was like, ooh, this is uncomfortable. And then we finally get down to the stage, and it's getting ready, and the sun is setting, and it was like a real hard, like head banging kind of thing. And we're up right by the front of the stage, and they had these big blow up sort of Easter Island head things on the corners, and the wind's blowing, and so they're kind of like coming at you. And then the music is gone, and I'm looking back over the sea of people that are all looking at me going, and I'm like, this is a cult. This is hell. What am I doing here? And I start freaking out. And I tell my friend, I'm like, I got to go back to the camp. And he's like, and he's like, it's like 2 miles that way. And their experience is just kicking in too, right? And I'm the wet blanket. And he was like, let's just go sit over here on the side for a minute. So I go, and he takes me away from that, and was seeing some crazy visuals, like his face like vibrating, and like even though it was super loud, just as he was talking to me, it was like I could hear him perfectly. But in this state, things were also very confusing. And so I didn't really understand our conversation, and we got into this misunderstanding, which then led to him going like, here, I got to go back over here. You do your thing. You stay with this girl with our group who I didn't know. And then she basically babysat me for the next 5-6 hours.
Wow.
And I was in this hellscape of thoughts and patterns, and like I thought I could control time, but then I wanted to get out of it. And then I was seeing porta potties and just loops of like, how do I make it stop? It was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. And I was looking at the clothes, these big, crazy, colorful clothes that I had borrowed from someone else, because I don't dress like that. As a gay boy who doesn't want you to see him, I was in neutrals and blacks and grays. So, and everybody's in fluorescents. And I was like, this is too much color. This is too much color. And I just start shedding all the things that I'm on. And I'm like, I feel like a fraud and I just want to go home. And I feel like I've ruined my friendship and I don't know how to fix it and I don't know where I am. And it was awful. And the next day I was just like, I want to get out of here. But we had all driven up together 13 hours. And for me to get anywhere was a plane ride that I couldn't afford. And luckily, one of the other friends in the group sat with me and he listened to me. And he let me talk through what my experience was. And I started to heal from it. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to stay. Let's make the most of it. And I had never done Molly, MDMA. And after having this worst experience, psychologically, spiritually, everything in my life, I was like, sure, let's go.
Why not?
Let's go. I threw up, which I guess can happen if you're not used to it. But then as the night went on, it was the best day of my life because I had all this, I had shed all these old thoughts and patterns and like I can let all that go because I was so caught up into how everybody else perceived me.
Which was really probably years of hiding, of being stuck inside of a version of you that second dose brought out. So as a facilitator, it's something that I see a lot with, depending on the medicine, is that it could be one incident that's actually just triggering years, things that are trapped inside.
Yeah, that all of that, but that euphoria mixed with the spectacle of what I was seeing, which I can distinctly remember being down front with my group of new friends, and the music was amazing. That show was like an hour. It went by in a flash, but it ended in confetti coming down. And when the lasers hit the confetti, it was like diamonds and everybody was joyful. And I had forgiven myself and my friend and my love. And I was like, this is the most amazing thing ever. And the next couple of days, I met so many new strangers because I was constantly getting lost from my group. And the vibe of the whole place, I remember leaving going, if anyone's looking for a place called heaven, after experiencing this, they're missing the point. And I had never really seen a psychic before on purpose. Again, Christian, we don't talk to no psychic. We don't read no.
They're bad.
Tarot cards.
We know the story
exactly.
of Saul and the witch and Samuel. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But back at the end of college, there was this Christian psychic in Chattanooga, Tennessee that my friends had gone to, and she'd rightly predicted some stuff. And she said she gets her information from angels. So they're like, Justice, come on. And I was like, well, I guess if I'm going to do it, if she's talking to angels, that's all right. So
I've never heard of a Christian psychic, but that's cool.
There you go. So when I walked into the room, take off your shoes, it's a little upper room, and she just looks at me like this. She's like, what is it you do? And at this point, I had just kind of started to act, and I was like, well, I'm going to be an actor. I'm going to go into film. And she's like, And she said, you will have a measure of success. And I was like, a measure? That don't sound like an Oscar. So then she said, I just see colors all around you. And I believe you can be successful at anything you want to do. I hadn't really thought about that moment in the decade or two, that had passed, but the colors and the colors. And there was something about that experience that I was like, this has something to do with it. I know it. 5 months later, 2018, I'm working on another show called Raising Dion. And I end up shooting it for a couple of months, and I'm staying with my mother. And her sister had given me a heads up. My mom had just retired from teaching third grade for like 40 years and said she's having some memory issues. And I was like, nah. She's got all the names mixed up from all the kids over all the years.
And she's getting old.
Yeah. But when I stayed there for a number of weeks, I was like, this is not just forgetting your keys. She would be like, we need to get some milk. And I was like, we have milk. And I would go over to the refrigerator, I'd open it and say, there it is. And when I would touch it and identify it, she'd be like, my eyes, you know how they are. But this was a problem. There was some real issues, and her handwriting was getting kind of strange. And I went on a hike with the same friend on Stone Mountain, this beautiful thing, a little bit of mushrooms. And on that hike, I came home and I knew that I had to move in with her. I just was so certain. And I got back to the house, and I'm standing outside of a house that I didn't grow up in. It's a nice house, but it's suburbia. I have no connection to it. I've been in LA for a decade, living that life.
So no, this is the greenhouse on the hill.
This is the greenhouse on the hill. Yeah. And I remember being in the driveway, and I just kind of dropped to my knees and was like, man, as a almost 40-year-old moving back in with your mother, as sweet as she was not on my list of things to do. But there was, I knew this is what I needed to do. So
was part of that in your mind, you're taking a step back because you're moving in with your mom, or because you knew something inevitable was happening?
It was all of it. It was
almost 40 and I'm moving in with my mom.
Well, yeah, and into a neighborhood where everybody my age had kids, and I'm in an old lady's house.
It's not the measure of success that you had envisioned.
Well, yeah, and then of course on top of that is this crazy disease. Like and we didn't have the official diagnosis at the time, but I was like, it is that or something worse. And it was the something worse. And so I moved in, and at the beginning of 2019, I'd come across, because I'm kind of a nerd. I read a lot of books, mostly Audible, because that helps. Is your book on Audible?
It is not on Audible yet.
Okay. All right.
I'm on like halfway through putting it on Audible. Yes. So
okay, good.
I read 42 books last year. So and listened to a bunch of other ones on Audible. But I love to read. I like the feel of paper.
The pace for me, I get so caught up in my imagination that I'm just slow. So having someone else go through it is better.
What I've also learned though, if you actually, because I love to buy the book and I listen to an Audible at the same time at 1.2.
I like that.
and then I highlight, and then I make notes, and then I give the book away.
That's a good plan.
Yeah. Like I retain it. I retain it much more if I can see it here and hear it at the same time.
Yeah. Well, that's how I was with Autobiography of a Yogi, which came into my life about a year ago, completely transformed my spiritual experience. And so I've got an old copy, and the Audible version is Ben Kingsley reading it, the Oscar winner. So I've gone through it several times.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pneuma, the crossroad of science and enlightenment. We hope you're enjoying the deep dive into psychedelics, neuroplasticity, and the path to transformation. Before we continue, let's discuss recovery. After powerful experiences, your mind deserves more than just rest. It needs real support. That's where Pneuma Hydrate comes in. Formulated with GABA, taurine, inositol, magnesium, and more, Pneuma Hydrate is designed to help your brain recover faster and support neuroplasticity, giving you the clarity and the energy to fully embrace your journey. Fuel your recovery and elevate your mind with Pneuma Hydrate. Check out pneuma.health to learn more. Now, enjoy the rest of the episode.
Anyway, so I was doing some research, listening to podcasts. Anyway, I stumbled across this video of an fMRI scan on YouTube of a brain on LSD, and it was on fire. You know, left and right hemispheres cross communicating, and I had a theory. I was like, I had looked into the work that Roland Griffiths had done for 15 plus years, of course, at Johns Hopkins, but it was all around end of life anxiety, depression, nothing about cognitive, memory, or motor function improvement. Certainly nothing with Alzheimer's, not in 2019.
No, I think even now, I think there's less than 3 studies being done. I think Hopkins is one now, but then I think there's 2 other ones that you're right. They're really more on the neuroscience, not the cognitive. Yeah.
Right. So I started to soft pitch it to my mom. And she had, of course, zero interest in doing psychedelics growing up, you know, in the 60s and 70s and all that. And again, my dad put people in jail for this stuff. But then when I found out that the U.S. government knew in the 40s that LSD could help cure alcoholism, I got very upset with my home country. And then, so anyway, I was showing my mom people, you know, TED Talks of these guys saying that it's, you know, safe and non-toxic and blah, 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 blah. And
non-addictive.
Right. And ultimately, her decision came down to 2 things. One is she was volunteering at that time at a mammogram clinic 1 day a week. And she helped the women come in and change their clothes and show them how to work the lockers. And she was in the bathroom there, and she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize her own face. Terrified. She was terrified. She told me this later that night. She said, Justice, until someone else came in the bathroom, I didn't even know how to get out. So she ran out and told me that, you know, of course she was scared. I brought up the mushrooms again, and she finally said, you know what? The God, because she's a devout Christian, she was my guru. She said, the God of creation would have provided a path of healing through his creation. And so with that assurance, in May of 2019, 2.5 grams in our backyard, some music playing, we did it. And the next day, I'll never forget, and you'll see this in the video, there's a storm coming, and she was just brighter. I mean, she was just...
It was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Beaming.
Yeah.
And she was like, ooh, there's a storm coming. Let's go look at it. And she just gets in the driveway and starts turning around in circles like this. And I'm telling you, she was terrified, as anybody would be, with what was happening to her. And so we would end up doing it, you know, about once a quarter because it didn't stop the Alzheimer's, but what I deduced was it was giving her a boost, right? She's losing neural pathways. This is giving her the ability to create new ones that will eventually be clogged and gone away. But the real turning point for me was as things would get worse, she would start to stutter. She'd lose a word, then she would just couldn't find it, and then she would start to do that. She had trouble understanding which side of the clothes had the hole on it. And of course, finding the kitchen was a problem. But the next day after one of the treatments, I'm coming downstairs and I hear this clack, clack, clack. And she's singing, "These boots are made for walking." And and she had dressed herself correctly. She had put on her makeup. And I was like, "Oh my God, how are you feeling?" And she was like, "Great. You knew that I would."
And that's actually, that's in the video. I saw that.
Yeah, that was it. And it was that moment that I was like, this is a miracle. People have to know about this. But I then faced a new problem. She did not like the treatment. She did not like not feeling like herself. And then, of course, it lasted so long. She'd be like, "Oh, I lose a whole day." And she would often not remember the day before, like at all during treatment. And, we love the garden, but the garden's only like this big.
Yeah.
And then the inside, full of hazards, hardwood floors, corners, stairs, pictures of family that warp and change. And I realized, I was like, okay, I researched the set and setting. I knew how big where you are makes a big difference. I learned that lesson
from the first, from the second LSD trip.
Yeah. Yeah. But then again, from that second experience when I was at the festival and saw all this immersive art and the lights and the lasers. And then when we go to my mom's treatments in the hospital and the fluorescent lights and the square rooms and the boxes, I was like, there has to be something in the middle. And especially for the type of protocol that we needed to address Alzheimer's. We weren't trying to address latent trauma, although she worked through that during several of her experiences. And this wasn't a one-off. This wasn't like, you're good, see us in a couple of years or next year.
Graduated. Awesome. Yeah.
Right. No, we had to do this every 3 months. So, and the higher the dose, the bigger the result. And twice I used LSD and that produced the most profound response, but it was so prolonged, even weirder for her that she just didn't want to do it. And so, my mission came out of that. I was like, okay, there are other middle America moms like her who are going to need this, who would be terrified of the experience. Let's make a place that was beautiful. Let's make somewhere where they felt safe and could have something to sort of entertain them, because the protocols involved for treating depression, PTSD, were all eye mask, headphones, limiting the sensory experience. But when I did that with my mom, first of all, she didn't like it for very long. I noticed a bigger difference when I could keep her up walking, talking, dancing, eyes open, experiencing something. And then we once went to the Van Gogh experience. Did you ever do that?
I have not.
We're traveling?
No, I've seen it. Real, yeah.
Yeah. And so we were just mesmerized sitting there watching this 3-dimensional vase sculpture with 3D projection on it, just coming to life and beautiful. We sat there for 45 minutes watching that thing. She loved it. I was like, why is this only entertainment?
Yeah.
Why?
On mushrooms?
No, we didn't.
Like, that would be amazing anyway, but yeah.
Of course. No, I had when I first had the idea to do this, I was like, I'm going to do something with her. And we're going to be outside and we're going to have this magical moment. The movie in my mind, the way that it played out was we're like walking through the woods and, we're on these mushrooms. And she always loved the fall, the bright beautiful colors. And I just knew that, man, once she has some psychedelics, it's going to be even more amazing. But things are going to be confusing, and then we're going to lose our way. And then she finds our path back to the car, and then that's going to be our moment. And we're going to cry, and it's going to be a miracle. That did not happen. That never happened. And I tried to do a lesser amount with her so I could kind of be on her level. No, it just made me more stressed out. And in the beginning, I didn't really know how to be a guide. And so I was afraid. And I was looking for her, to catch her from slipping into something, and that caused her to be unsettled. So I had to learn how to project love, project positivity, project calm, and I got better sort of as it went along.
Which I think, a lot of that really is just what's the intention behind why are you doing it? And that's always a challenging position as a facilitator and a guide, is to be able to know what your intentions are for the people that you're facilitating. And if you're worried and projecting about them, it's just like this. And I've seen this like vicious thing that happens whether we realize it or not.
Right. Well, I saw that the guides doing like ayahuasca, they do the medicine with you.
Mm-hmm.
But they also have a lot of assistance. I did ayahuasca for the first time last year, which is maybe another story for another time. Yeah, I realized, okay, I gotta be on all cylinders here. And, but yes, so I had this concept. I was like, if I could make some place where she would feel safe, that was different than the house, because part of what makes it uncomfortable once the psychedelic kicks in is our expectation of what our environment should be looking like and doing. So in my research, I realized that, of course, straight lines, nowhere in nature, right? And we're in boxes and straight lines everywhere, So when you're on psychedelics and you see a staircase, that motherfucker is going all over the place.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we're taught to think linearly, and anyone who knows when your ego is down and you're free, which is what psychedelics do, see things as what they really are, and they're not linear. They're completely beautiful. Like A doesn't necessarily go to B. A could really go to D. It will eventually go to where it needs to go. And I think that's the beautiful thing about even like this conversation. So while we got here in a roundabout. It wasn't a straight line, which is what's so.
That's because I'm talking.
No, just the whole interaction, because even when I look at like my story, we kind of talked, and it's so crazy because we're so similar. I grew up in a Christian home that was not like that. So I was actually sexually abused when I was 5. Happened for 2 years, never told anybody, and I carried that. And when I went to church, it was that God prevented me from really having the experience of God, because that was all in the way. So what you typically see in victim, if that's the right word, in people who've suffered trauma, is you go one of two directions. And we saw it with your dad. So you go that way, or you become a narcissist and you become successful. In spite of everything that's going on inside of you and you die, you go the other direction. And that's what I did. If there was a submarine sail contest in my little school, I won it. I always had to win. And that was how I felt worth. And when I was in the middle of burning it all to the ground after I built everything, it's such a crazy similar story. It was my doctor who actually told me to do psychedelics. I was part of a mastermind group in LA, in Orange County, and I went, and all of these businessmen were having this, they were rebuilding their lives and finding God again. And my wife has said to me, I don't love you. I love you. I'll never leave. I committed that to you, but I'm not in love with you. Like, you don't even love yourself. And I would lay in bed at night and I would dream of dying. And that was since I was in the 7th grade. So you have this burden you carry your whole life. And then you are giving this gift. You say no. Like, no, I'm a Christian. No, I was raised drugs. It was a drug. And there was all these things. And my doctor says to me in Arizona, bro, I don't get it. This is stuff from God that he made in the ground that could free you. And you're saying, no, I give you something every month. It comes from a lab. I have no idea where it comes from, and you take it without question. I remember thinking about that, and my wife and I flying home, I'm like, I don't have an answer for that. Like, I don't. Like, so I do all this research, very similar to you, and I go to a retreat, and I have MDMA, and I relived all of my traumatic experiences. I got to revisit my trauma. And on the third time in the room, he was sitting on the bed crying because it was done to him. And he was telling me this. And now I'm able to reframe it because I'm seeing it differently now. I'm not a victim. I'm now understanding it. I almost feel sorry for him.
So you were just on MDMA?
MDMA and ketamine. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah. So the beautiful thing about MDMA is it floods your brain with serotonin, which is why I always equate it as a warm cup of hot chocolate. It's great for complex PTSD. Because of that, it allows you to feel the love side of things. But I got to relive like all of these imprints. I saw a fight with my parents. I was 4. My dad came into my room crying. Like, it was just a nasty fight. I never remembered that fight. Like,
wow.
And he came in and I said, "Why did you put that on?" Like, I was 4, but that shaped everything I thought about money and success. I never wanted that. So I was going to do everything that I could to not. So we got kicked out of Christian school because we couldn't pay tuition. My dad tried, but he went to Bible college and wanted to be a missionary and didn't. So I remember coming home and being angry at them, but never realizing from my dad's perspective the things that he was carrying. He went to Vietnam. He left home when he was 17. He would join the Navy to get away from his family. But I never gave him that grace. Like, I never really considered any of that. So for me, as I'm hearing this from you, it's so beautiful because I completely, like, I see the pattern that you were in the same thing. And when I revisited, I was driving down the road 6 weeks after my experience. And I hear God say, "You know what you need to do?" And I'm like, I know, like, one, who is this? Who's talking? And they're like, getting the
Come on,
download.
speaker.
Yeah, you're like, you're getting the downloads. And he's like, you need to find your abuser and call him. I'm like, yeah, dude, that's not happening. Like, not happening. I found him after 48 years. I called him and I forgave him. Yeah. Yeah.
How did he answer
I
the
didn't
phone?
know how it was going to go. I didn't even know what to say. I found him on Facebook and I sent him a message, and it was a family member. And not to get into all of that because I don't want to drag up old things in my family, but I said, I don't know if you remember me, but I would like to talk. I didn't hear anything for a few days. And it's kind of like, hey, you abused me for 2 years. Can you pass the sugar and give me a call, by the way? And I'm like, I don't know how this is going to go. Like, he was already married and had a family, and all of this stuff was going on. And
How much older was he than you?
I was
If you want to
5, he
share.
was 16. It happened every Sunday for 2 years. So, yeah. So he gave me his number and I called. And at first it was like this deflection, and it was well, it happened to me. And I said, I know it did because you told me. Like, and I'm so sorry that it did. I'm so sorry that it happened. And I don't want anything from you. Just want you to know that it's okay. I am going to be okay now. Like, I'm now going to be okay. I carried this weight forever. I'm really good now. And I just wanted to say, I forgive you. And he's like, okay. That was it. I got off the phone and I'm like, I can pretty much do whatever I want to do now. Because that was
Wow.
the hardest thing I'd ever done. And my mom called me in October, end of October, beginning of November. He was dying and I didn't know it. He died liver in October, November. And my mom called me and she's
Recently?
like, yeah, last
Right after?
last October. Yeah. So this was last year. So yeah.
So you told him last year and he
I
died
called him
the
in
next
April and he died in October. And my mom called and she's like, I thought you would want to be the first to know. And I remember getting off the phone and I started crying. And then I started approaching it from a facilitator, because by then I'd already gone and done the work and I'd learned how to facilitate other businessmen and was doing the work with others. And I said, okay, let's walk back the block, these emotions, and let's kind of have this conversation now with myself. And it wasn't that I was sad that he had died. I was sad because I didn't know if he had closure.
Mhm.
with whoever abused him. And I wouldn't know to this day, like, whether he did or not, but it was so sad.
Yeah, but you gave him that opportunity. God literally beeped in and said, yo, you need to call this guy, because obviously he understands the timeline. Whether that was at the front of his mind or the back of his mind, he was obviously old enough to recall that he had those matter of months to figure things out. And then it allowed you the ability to have some peace about it, because if he had died without you having to be able to say that, you would be in a different place. First of all, thank you for sharing that and opening up. When my family first found out that I was gay, the question was, did someone do this to you? Because
that automatically makes you gay.
That's what happens, right?
I know.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it had not happened to me, but my name is Justice. I think like a justice, let me weigh the sides here. And I'm kind of the person in my friend group who helps mediate or solve or gain some insight, that sort of thing. And I've started to approach it almost like an acting job, because they come at me with, all their ammo for their side of why this person did that thing. And I then start asking questions about the other person, and they don't have answers for a lot of those things. And I'm like, well, what was their dad like? Right?
Yeah.
Or, I just start to dive in. And I was talking to this one girl who had recently gotten a divorce, and we'd gone to college together. And she was not liking how her ex-husband was acting around their children, showing some frustration. And I was like, well, what was it like when you first got married? Like, what, And she's like, why are you asking that? I was like, what? She's like, are you about to defend him? I was like, I'm just trying to understand him. And then I might be able to share something with you that could help. Because if, as an actor, what I'm giving when I have an audition is something called a breakdown. So it's the name of the character, age range, and a brief description about what they do on the show and what kind of person, some hints to personality type, but oftentimes we don't get a full backstory unless you're the main character. So for some reason, something about this face screams bad guy. And I've mostly played, like I said, sort of these unsavory characters. Well, I've never been in a fight in my life. So to understand someone who would be not only willing to fight, but kill somebody else, so I play a serial killer, I had to think about what their home life was like. I had to figure out a way to justify the things that they were doing, because I'm telling you, the bad guy never thinks he's the bad guy unless you're in a cartoon. So I am starting to tell people as a way, if you want to understand somebody else, if you want to be right, go on being right, right? You can be justified in your anger and everything else. But if you really want to understand somebody else, do a little bit of the work. Start to ask those questions to find out. I mean, granted, he was 16 years old and you were 5, and he was old enough to know better. It wasn't like kids playing around, but he was also a 16-year-old, right? And you think back to where you were as a 16-year-old, like where your brain is and understanding. And of course, if this in all likelihood had happened to him, then there's all these other things at play. So there's no one that I don't think that I could forgive or understand, because if I had the eyes of God, and to be able to witness every frame of their life, and to take it a step further and actually feel how the chemicals surge while those things were happening in front of them, like an avatar, I would completely understand their actions. So the only things between me forgiving them or understanding them is that godlike ability. Since I don't currently have that, I just I automatically go, okay, yeah. If I were to have that experience, I know that I would understand them, and I know I'd figure out a way to forgive them. So it's done. So for me, that's kind of where I'm at in terms of the really difficult things that come up in my life.
Well, and I know, and a lot of it too, though, is it's ego. You had said it's the wanting to be right. I'd rather be right than to actually have to go inside of myself or look at somebody else's situation that's going to cause me to question my own belief system. Because no one likes to really do that. Like we're comfortable in our own, and it's interesting because the way that I always look at everything is there is no right and wrong. There only is. Now, yeah, they're serial killers. Clearly, we know that is. But everything else that happens, if we call something good, if I take you back in history long enough, it was probably bad at one point. And the same thing with bad and good. So there isn't, there only is. And most of the things that we call bad and good are, well, you live them as well. Church, home, neighborhood, community, friends. That's where you get your shaping. Your experiences are what tell you what is and isn't. It doesn't make them so. It just makes your experience yes or no, good, bad, right, wrong. I mean, it really is. And I was sharing this with my 10-year-old. So, and it's funny because I talk to my kids like this. I have an 8 and a 10-year-old, and they come into my room and somebody did something. I'm like, okay, well, tell me the story behind the story, because there's always the story behind the story. It's never the story.
She hit me. What did you do?
Yeah, what did you do? Or somebody called me this. So there's always like and I always find that with adults it's even more hilarious because the story is usually around the block, 5 streets down and around the other side. So it's never that because we go back far enough and we actually do the work, like what you're saying. But I was sharing that there was an Austrian scientist like 50 years ago who did this experiment, and he took these glasses and he created prisms and mirrors in them, and he had his subject wear them. Well, what would happen the first day? You would bang into stuff. Well, after the 7th day, what was interesting is that people could start to navigate the world walking upside down. 3 weeks, totally comfortable. 3 months, when they took the glasses off, do you know what happened when they took the glasses off? They could actually see without the glasses upside down because their brain had created these new neural pathways to be able to see things inversely. So what you see is only a collective of your shared experience. It doesn't make it so, which is why when you talk about psychedelics and seeing the things that you saw with the colors and how vibrant things became, it was because the experiences that you were having with the dopamine rush and all the other things is what made it beautiful. And LSD is so interesting because it attaches to your 2A receptor. There's a lot of like other reasons for this, but it's fascinating how brain works, which leads me back to now. I mean, you're creating this environment and you've been working with other moms that have had similar experiences.
I worked with 2 other Alzheimer's patients with different presentations. So my mother had a rare form that affected her vision, something called posterior cortical atrophy. So in addition to difficulty with memory retrieval, she was going blind, but not because the world was going dark. Her brain was misinterpreting what her eyes were seeing and affected by her psychology and access to the memories, exactly like a psychedelic experience. So she, having been an elementary school teacher for 40 years, would often hallucinate kids going by. So her brain is struggling to understand what she's seeing, and it's a little slower. So we'd be on walks around the neighborhood, and she was like, "Is that Tanner?" A little kid that lives next door. And it'd be a fire hydrant because she's on the sidewalk. It's about this high, has 2 things that could be arms. But when I would tell her that, oh, it's a fire hydrant, it would lock into place. It's a fire hydrant. So that was another kind of aha moment because I was like, oh, so she's like her waking life is moving into a psychedelic like experience, which then meant that my psychedelic PTSD electric forest was what she is going and is experiencing. And I was simultaneously excited and terrified because I was like, that is a nightmare. I can't have her in this, I have to do something. We have to do something. But it also gave me a new tool because unlike so many people who suffer with this disease, you don't really know what they're experiencing. People who are treating them don't really know what that's like. But I was like, and it helped me redesign the house. It helped me with colors and how to make things look sort of more apparent. It also helped me to use music and frequency in a certain way to help keep the mood psychologically sort of buoyant. And it gave her one other gift, which was at the end of her life, she became okay with the hallucinations. We'd be walking out of the bathroom, I remember, and she said, "You see that little boy on the swing?" And she's just like looking into the corner of the bathroom and the floor. I was like, "No." And I said, "Does he look happy?" And she was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, that's good." But that's when she was kind of in a good spirit. Sometimes she was like, "Do you see that woman clutching her child against the water?" And I was like, she always had these fears around water. And I was like, "No, ma'am." And she'd be like, "Oh, okay, okay." So it gave her this other kind of endurance. Unlike anybody else, when she finally had to go into the memory care, they had to be so over medicated because the people who are taking care of them don't know how to handle them, certainly not equipped. And she was so peaceful and could have conversations with you. And, it really was a gift. I also recognized that my career in acting also kind of paid off because some people will tell me, I'm like, don't try to correct her. It doesn't matter. Just take her attention to something else or play along if you can, unless it's really important. And I was like, that's improv. And one of as soon as I finish Theropod, get that up and going and running on its own, I'm going to work on connecting improv actors with memory care so they can tour the halls and engage and have conversations and that sort of thing. That was not your question. Your question was the other people that I treated. The other two that I treated, one was Susan Mitchell Keats. We met her through Emory. They had sort of a support group for recent diagnoses, and a very, very smart lady. She had been an executive and she diagnosed herself. She knew that there was some kind of problem. Even the doctors were like, "You're fine." And she's like, "No, I know my brain. I live with my brain. Something's happening." And she was actually the first one that I treated in my prototype. In 2021, I built a prototype of a Theropod in a house over in East Atlanta, small room, 10 feet, 11 and a half feet. I could only stand up right in the middle. It was kind of in a dormer. But the shape of the kind of curved walls actually played into the comfort that people felt in it, like a cocoon, instead of these big, square rooms. And of course, the lights and everything else. I put padded floors down for safety as well as proprioception, which helps. And anyway, in the days leading up to that treatment, she was terrified because she had a daughter who was 22 and she was like, "I can't lose. She's not going to have a mom." And we did this pre-interview and it was heartbreaking. Next day, bright, excited. She said, "Justin," we did the interview the next day. She's also in the video. She's like, "Justice, I cleaned all the windows in my house." She's like, "Do you know how long I've been looking at these windows?" And then she said, "I also took care of all my life insurance and death policies, things that I didn't even want to look at. I handled it." And she described it as an added layer of acuity and perception that lasted for months. And then the other one that I treated was a friend of mine's father, another different presentation, whereas my mom and Susan knew that there was a problem and knew that something was happening. His presentation, he was like a child. He was like a child. And in about these 10, 15-minute loops of showing you his bicycle, and he used to be a dancer, and his wife was a dancer. And one Christmas, the family invited me to come and do a session with him. And we did. And we had a lot of dancing. I put him on a vibrating back because I'd found the work of Dr. I believe it's Lee Hart. He'd done a TED Talk about using frequency in the gamma range that, of course, can only be transduced. You can't hear it through your ears, right? It's got to have a transducer. So he built this sort of like back thing that you could order on Amazon, and had a cycle of music. And so I brought that, sat him on it with the mushrooms. He did that, and he kind of zoned out for a little while, and then he was like, I guess that's it. I was like, how you feeling? Great. And his whole family dances, so we played a lot of music and they were dancing. And what his wife would tell me later is, as his condition got worse, he wouldn't let go of her hand. He was so afraid to kind of move. He loved to move, but he would be afraid to be by himself. And that day he was like spinning her around, twirling. By that evening, as he was during the come down, we're getting ready to have dinner. I asked him, how was today? And he was like, today was wonderful. He was like, it was a celebration of humanity. We were like, a celebration of humanity? Yeah. And he was like, I got a song for you. And he was like, hit it. And he has this favorite song that they played it, and he goes up and does a solo for us. And you see that in the video. He's just spinning around, doing his thing. And so there was no Theropod that he was in. What I ended up writing a paper a couple of months ago, because I've had so many people who have a loved one with this disease or are curious about what my experience was, because there's not a lot to find right now in terms of the research. And so what I laid out in this paper is how, at least for this goal, to increase neural connections and improve motor function and things like that, you want to have them moving. You want to have their eyes open, because that's problem solving. Even trying to talk, even if you can't get it right, the act of trying to figure it out or navigate the house is causing new connections to be made that then they have access to for X number of weeks or months to follow. So what I point out in my paper is that, there's something like 35 different conditions currently being studied in universities all over the world, using psychedelics to treat just everything, basically everything.
240 studies right now all over the world.
Excuse me.
240.
I need to update my paper.
It's crazy.
Yeah, so 240. We're going to need, and we're an unhealthy bunch, from chronic diseases to mental health. We're going to need places. We're going to need infrastructure for these things to happen. And I'm in support of all of them. We need as many as we can have. Theropod ain't going to be for everybody. Some people are going to want to go down to Jamaica in a retreat, or feel safer at a glass clinic, perhaps. But what I'm sort of preaching to the world is that we're going to there's going to be different protocols that we're going to establish, that somewhere in between this medical model of muting the senses and how the indigenous people did, which was song, dance, smoke. And it's my argument that, because nothing can replace nature, right? It's where it is. I'm not trying to do that. What I believe is, what I'm doing through my company is using the tools of our time, just as our ancestors did, to support and enhance the psychedelic experience. And with these new treatments, we're going to need new protocols. And while there's much to be gained with our eyes closed using this medicine, anyone who's done it can tell you there's also much to be gained with your eyes open.
Definitely. So the new company is Theropod.
Yes.
And
well, it sort of expanded into
so the name of our company now is Theropod. I have your YouTube video of the ones that you're describing with the 3 with your mom and then the other 2. And then you sent me a beautiful eulogy of Darty, the waves. And can I share that?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you can. It's strange. She passed about a year and a half ago. I haven't even posted publicly that she's passed, even though so I'm doing a documentary about the experience. She felt like she didn't really have a purpose once this thing was kicking in, and I pitched her the idea of like, well, your new purpose could be for you to share your life, because there are going to be people who are going to be scared to do this kind of medicine but need it. And if you'd be willing to do that, I think we could help a lot of people. And she was brave enough to let me try. And so for 4 years, I have footage of, before, during, and after this experience up into the end of her life. And just now starting to raise some money to finish the documentary, because it's a story that the world needs to hear. My mom's neurologist, when I raised my hand, I was like, by the way, when I give her, psilocybin mushrooms, these things happen. And he said, that's not what we're studying here. And, my family, bless their heart, were like, see, listen to the man in the white coat.
Which is so interesting, because if you listen to or look or follow Dr. Guy Dolan, she's doing amazing work with octopi and the critical period.
What is it?
With octopi. So she's actually, her lab, so she was also at Hopkins. She now has her own lab in Berkeley, and she studies octopi. And she has given all of them a psychedelic, and she's been able to map the critical period, the critical opening that you're talking about. Because we know that in psychedelics, what's so beautiful is exactly what you're describing, is that the brain starts to fire. It starts to create these pathways, but there's this critical period, this opening where it could be 3 to 4 hours, it could be 12 hours, but it could be the neural pathways are created over months. And I think Nature actually did a study, and there was a scientist last year that actually went into an MRI machine on psychedelics, and he actually mapped and he showed the neurons firing in a cross pattern. It was the most incredible thing, which is kind of why we created Pneuma, because I created this supplement that supports that neuroplasticity, that critical period. So it's something that you take every day. But it is so crazy to me. Like, there's 5 drugs right now that are on the market for Alzheimer's. None of them cure. 3 of them only mask the symptoms, 2 slow down. One is like $600 for a 30-day supply. The other, they range to $52,000 a year. So the man in the white coat,
zero.
So the man in the white coat, doesn't make
zero
any
perceivable. We keep talking over each other. Sorry. I was just gonna say, yeah, they offered us a Mediterranean diet and pills that made zero perceivable improvement, and we saw improvement in under 24 hours. Under 24 hours. And people told me, they're like, oh, well, you gotta have double blind, blah, 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 in 3 years and backfill it and all this. And I said, you got to prove that more than your mom could be helped by this. And then I treated 2 other patients and it worked. And I said, you know what? I don't need a double blind study to share my story. And this population of people need something right now. And if they knew that growing in their backyard could help their grandmother not die in a terrible way, drifting off into darkness, and can actually have joy, they need to know that. And I was under the threat of going to jail the whole experience. Even people that I know were that was drifting about. And for me, listen, we need to do these things the right way. We need to do them with intention. I'm not going to preach that anybody just go out there and do it. I've since learned that I learned lessons immediately after I took psychedelics, but I'm a reflective person. And I didn't do it till late in life. And I thought that everybody who does psychedelics will immediately see all the issues and be able to fix them. Well, people are already doing these medicines, and for the large part, they're not knowing because they're illegal. We can't have these open conversations about doing them with intention and doing them in safe places. And what I tell my friends and other people, especially the younger ones who have only experienced it at a festival, I was like, you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself because these drugs are so powerful to harness them to improve your life. If your life's perfect, if all your relationships are glorious and, great, go watch a laser show. But if there's something that you want to work on, these medicines have the power to do that very quickly, but it's about intention, it's about safety. I'm starting to share this news, and I want to encourage families to do the research. You can reach out to me. I'll share with you what I know. I fear that if we're going to wait till that news report that says mushrooms can help with Alzheimer's, it may not happen anytime soon.
I had this conversation with someone on LinkedIn the other day because we were talking about, and again, I watch very little TV. I haven't watched the news in probably 10 years. So politically, I have like less than zero agenda. But I posted a video of RFK, not because of the man, but because of I want to sit down with everyone, the mom and the scientist. And I want to be able to have an open and transparent conversation. And someone had came back to me and we were talking about trusting the science. And I'm not going to say don't trust the science, but I will say, just as you had said earlier, we knew in the 40s that LSD was there. We knew in the East that MDMA actually helped people because we used it in marriage counseling. Bill Wilson from Alcoholics Anonymous, he actually was cured. His spiritual experience freeing him of alcohol was from LSD. That's all been whitewashed. So we know the science was there. We also know that there was a nefarious political agenda that erased decades of research. So to wait for a scientist to say that it's now okay, it'll be too late. It'll be way too late. So I 100% applaud and support this. I support you. And I think that was why when we connected and you sent me these videos, it was so beautiful. It was like a brother that I felt like I'd always had. And I don't know why I did. And now I know why. Thank you. Thank you so much for your courage. Thank you for standing up. Your mom is a hero and would be so proud of what you're doing. And I cannot wait to share this. I cannot wait to share this in my circle. I've already introduced you into the Mind Collective, and I can't wait to get your story out.
Thank you. And I've had people say, you're like, oh, you're a better person than me because I would have done that with my mom. And my response is, I don't know your mom. She might have been crazy. It was a little bit easier for me because mine was very sweet and kind. But if my mother was your mother and you knew what I knew, you do the same thing. So I'm just thankful that I was in this position. I feel like as wonderful and cool as the acting stuff, was and is, now it's just kind of like a cool party trick. I don't lead with it and people find out and it's there, but this is my purpose.
This is your purpose.
This is it.
Justice, thank you. Thank you and I got through this without crying. I honestly didn't know that I would, because I remember my grandma, who I was so close to. And I watched her at the end, and I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know anything about psychedelics. I didn't know anything that could have helped. And I watched her die and suffer. And this will make a difference. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's. This is it. This is, like I told you at the beginning. I have yet to share this publicly with anyone. So this is the spark. and let's see how big this flame gets.
We're going to do it. This is Alan Wiederhold, and this is Pneuma. And I cannot wait to share just as all of your links, your paper, anything that you want me to share. We will make sure that the world knows about this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure.